Can faith and logical reasoning coexist together? They told us that faith begins where logic ends, that the moment you start to reason, you stepped out of belief. Yet, in the quiet spaces of the soul, where truth whispers louder than arguments, one begins to wonder, is that really true? Must faith and reason be enemies, or have we simply misunderstood the language of both? Faith is not the absence of logic, it is the expansion of it. Reason is not the denial of faith, it is the structure that gives faith its shape. The problem has never been between believing and thinking, but between pride and humility. The arrogance that says, if I cannot explain it, it cannot be real. Yet the greatest thinkers in history, from ancient prophets to modern scientists, have found themselves standing before mysteries too vast to measure, yet too consistent to deny. They stand in awe, and awe is the birthplace of both faith and wisdom. When you look at creation, not just with the eyes of religion, but with the eyes of wonder, logic itself bows to something higher. The order of galaxies, the fine-tuned constants of physics, the structure of DNA, the symmetry of mathematics, all point to a mind that reasons perfectly. The universe is not chaotic faith, it is intelligent order. If logic were born of nothing, it would have no pattern. But because logic exists, faith becomes the only logical conclusion. Faith is not irrational, it is transrational. It moves beyond reason without contradicting it. A seed falls into the ground and dies, and from its death springs life. Nature preaches resurrection long before theology does. The sun disappears every night and returns in the morning. The invisible wind moves visible trees. Everything physical testifies to the invisible. And the one who sees this connection has entered the sacred space where faith and logic hold hands. The ancient prophets reasoned with God. Abraham asked questions. Moses debated. Job wrestled. Paul reasoned in the synagogues. Even Jesus invited inquiry. Which of you convicts me of sin? What do you think? Why do you doubt? His invitations were not threats to reason, but doors to deeper revelation. God does not fear your logic, He gave it to you. But logic without humility becomes blind. Faith without reason becomes reckless. The two were meant to work together, the intellect seeking truth and faith daring to walk into it. In the spiritual realm, logic is not destroyed, it is purified. True logic flows from the Logos, the divine reason, the Word through whom all things were made. John called him Logos, not randomly, but intentionally, because to understand God is to understand that logic itself is a reflection of His nature. Every equation that works, every law that holds, every cause and effect that functions, these are echoes of divine order. To walk in faith is to walk in harmony with that order, even when you cannot see the full map. The mind that rejects faith in pursuit of logic ends up losing both. The mind that rejects reason in pursuit of blind faith ends up drifting into superstition. But the heart that sees God in both revelation and reason begins to understand life as a divine equation, spirit and matter, mystery and evidence, seen and unseen, dancing together in perfect rhythm. Faith does not cancel logic, it completes it. Logic asks, how? Faith whispers, why? Logic builds the bridge, faith dares to cross it. In the silence of prayer, logic kneels. In the wonder of discovery, faith smiles. The scientist who studies the universe with awe and the believer who prays in surrender are standing on the same ground. One looks through a microscope, the other through a scripture, yet both seek the same source. What divides them is not truth, but interpretation. The Spirit of truth speaks both languages fluently, the language of mathematics and the language of miracles. Faith does not demand that you shut down your mind. It asks that you open it wider than logic alone allows, because there are realities beyond formulas, like love, beauty, morality, consciousness. You can measure the brain, but not the mind. You can scan the heart, but not love. You can predict the weather, but not the human will. Logic explains the mechanics, but faith reveals the meaning. Faith gives logic purpose. Logic gives faith discipline. Imagine faith as the wind and logic as the wings. Wings without wind cannot fly, and wind without wings cannot rise. The spirit and the intellect were never meant to compete. They were designed to cooperate. When faith grows without logic, it becomes fanaticism. When logic grows without faith, it becomes cynicism. But when they grow together, they birth wisdom, that sacred harmony where knowledge becomes light and belief becomes power. Perhaps that is why the wisest men were not merely thinkers, and the truest prophets were not merely dreamers. Solomon sought wisdom and found God. Einstein sought the laws of the universe and said God does not play dice. Both stood at the same horizon, where understanding ends and wonder begins. It is at that edge that faith and logic exchange greetings. Logic says, I have come as far as I can. Faith says, let me take you further. To deny logic in the name of faith is to insult the God who designed order. To deny faith in the name of logic is to forget that logic itself came from faith, the belief that truth exists and can be known. Every scientist begins with faith. Faith that there is a pattern, faith that the universe is intelligible. Every believer uses logic. Logic that creation implies a creator, that design implies intention, that moral law implies a lawgiver. The two are threads of the same divine fabric. We live in a world that demands evidence but ignores meaning. Yet evidence without meaning is noise, and meaning without evidence is confusion. Faith gives evidence its soul. Logic gives faith its skeleton. You need both to walk upright in the search for truth. The highest form of understanding is not choosing between faith and logic. It is standing in the middle, where revelation and reason merge into wisdom. When you reach that point, the arguments dissolve. You no longer need to prove God. You begin to perceive Him in the symmetry of nature, in the rhythm of seasons, in the conscience that whispers right from wrong, in the hunger for eternity that no earthly pleasure can satisfy. Logic can take you to the door, but only faith can open it. So yes, faith and logical reasoning can coexist, not as rivals, but as reflections of one another. Faith is divine logic stretched beyond human limits. Logic is faith expressed in patterns the mind can trace. One reaches upward, the other reaches inward. Together, they reveal the blueprint of reality. That the visible is born from the invisible, that truth is not fragmented but whole, and that the universe itself is a living sermon, written by reason, understood by faith. And when a soul awakens to this revelation, it stops fighting between thinking and believing. It begins to see that the greatest miracle is not the suspension of logic, but the illumination of it. The mind kneels, the spirit rises, and in that sacred stillness, both faith and reason whisper the same word: truth.